Europe's biggest economy is getting back to business. Germany has announced plans to get restaurants, shops and also professional football back up and running. Already some shops, hairdressers and schools are open there, and it's one of several countries that has started easing their lockdowns. But Germany is in fact going further than most, and this is why. Germany has around 167,000 confirmed coronavirus cases. The recorded death toll, though, is under 7,000. This is much lower than the figures in the UK, in Italy, France and also Spain. So now Angela Merkel is starting to navigate Germany out of its lockdown. And she has made a deal with regional leaders, which means social distancing does stay into June. Face masks must be worn in shops and on public transport until then too. And there's another caveat. If new outbreaks are identified, new local or regional lockdowns must be reimposed. Well, this is the Chancellor speaking earlier.
We are now at a point where we can say that we have achieved the aim of slowing the spread of the virus and protecting our health system from being overwhelmed. And we could do this because citizens have lived their lives responsibly throughout this virus. They have committed to the restrictions, thereby saving the lives of others.
So that's Angela Merkel. This is the BBC's Jenny Hill in Berlin, who's been tweeting about one possible way for German restaurants to reopen, saying that food is to be covered when served, waiters in gloves and masks, 1.5 meters between tables, and diners can't stay over 2 hours, also no groups. And this is a proposal from the Association of Hotels and Restaurants. And here's more from Jenny on today's developments.
This country is in a good position. The infection rates have been steadily falling. There's hospital capacity to spare. But that's put Angela Merkel under pressure from the leaders of Germany's 16 states who desperately want to restart their local economies. At that meeting today, and we're told it was indeed very stormy, they agreed that they can open shops, restaurants, hotels, albeit with strict social distancing measures, and that Germany's professional football league, the Bundesliga, can resume matches, although they must be held behind closed doors. Now, there are important caveats. People here can't simply go out now and meet up with whoever they'd like to. They still have to wear face masks on public transport and in shops, and the authorities will continue to test and contact trace aggressively. But additionally, Angela Merkel today won a significant concession from those regional leaders in the form of an emergency brake. What that means is that should infections rise above a prescribed limit anywhere in this country, the local authorities will be required to immediately reimpose restrictions. You know, polls suggest that the majority of Germans have rather supported Angela Merkel's pretty cautious approach so far. Today she said that Germany had put the first phase of the pandemic behind it, but warned that a long battle with the virus still lies ahead.
There in Berlin, Ros Atkins has been looking at Germany, and also, Ros, you've been looking at other developments across Europe. What do you have?
Hi, Kasia. Yes, a number of things to bring you. Let's begin with a stark warning from the European Commission, which is saying that Europe is now experiencing the worst economic shock since the Great Depression of the 1930s. And it's gone on to say the eventual outcome could even be worse than that. So understandably, every country is mindful of the huge economic cost of lockdown, but they are, of course, also mindful of a possible new spike in virus infections as restrictions are eased. First of all, let's hear from Germany's economy minister speaking to the BBC's Newsnight.
When you have to switch from liberalizing to shut down again, and this 2 or 3 times, then it would have disastrous consequences for the economy.
And then here's Aaron Heselhurst on why Germany's economy is going to need more than the measures that were announced today.
It is expected to see economic activity in certain parts to rebound fairly quickly, but the experts I speak to are very quick to remind us that the German economy is a manufacturing economy, right? The Germans make a lot of stuff. That means they're more reliant on the rest of the world, and in particular China and the US. So really, Germany needs a healthy Chinese and US economy for it to rebound quickly. And on the flip side of that, on the other side of that EU coin, you've got the likes of Greece, Spain and Italy, where the Commission says they're going to struggle. They're going to struggle to regain growth. They've seen investment just fall off a cliff. But also the big hit, one of their most important industries is going to take, and that's tourism.
Well, let's talk about tourism. Italy's Prime Minister has been sounding positive about the possibility of people being able to take some form of summer holiday in the next few weeks. Evidently, he's not the only one thinking this way. Airbnb is now telling us it's seen a jump in bookings from Europeans, and we know that for all European countries, tourism is hugely important to their national economies. Just look at the figures behind this industry. The most recent figures for France, this is 2018, show it had nearly 90 million international tourists. That's followed by Spain with 82 million arrivals. And then you have Italy with 62 million arrivals. And of course, these three are the worst hit countries within the European Union. Let's hear from Rory Boland, who's travel editor at the consumer advice organisation Which.
The chances of travel internationally generally are quite low for the summer season. What we are seeing happen is some countries where there has been a low number of infections are kind of talking to each other about almost exchanging holidaymakers. So we've seen that in the Baltics, Latvia, Lithuania and Estonia are talking about opening up to each other so that holidaymakers can travel. We've seen it further afield with Australia and New Zealand as well. So it does look like we may be able to, I suppose, travel in our near neighbourhood in those countries with a low number of infections. The bad news is if, like me, you're in the UK or perhaps you're in the US, we are probably a long way down the list of citizens that countries want to accept in because of the high number of infections. So I think what we will see is a kind of slow unlocking between individual countries. And of course, this is only just starting now, these countries unlocking. What we don't know is if there will be another flare-up of the coronavirus, which would induce another lockdown. And so we really are only seeing the roots of the possibilities of travel returning to normal at the moment.
Also want to update you on the lockdown in Spain. It's now set to continue its lockdown for at least 2 more weeks. That's because Parliament's voted to extend the country's state of emergency. This is what we heard from the Prime Minister earlier.
The decision to come to Parliament to ask you for yet another extension of the state of emergency is based on science, and those who oppose it and vote against the state of emergency and the extension are basing their decisions on the worst possible politics, and that is partisan politics.
So lots of different calculations for European leaders, and everyone is watching how the different countries fare. But I think it's reasonable to say Germany is a particular focus, not just because of how it's managed to keep its number of fatalities relatively low at this point, but we're now watching keenly to see how its infection rates react as Angela Merkel and those regional leaders that you met today ease those restrictions. Lots of different detail, Kasia. All of it is also available via the BBC News website, bbc.com/news, and the BBC News app.
Ros, as always, many thanks. Yes, a lot of interest in what is going to happen in Germany going forward. Ros Atkins there.
More than 33 million Americans have lost their jobs in the past 7 weeks alone. That's roughly 1 in 5 of the workforce. It is a devastating turnaround for a country whose jobless rate was at a 50-year low just 8 weeks ago. Nick Bryant, who's in New York, has spent the night on the city's subway, a refuge for the poor and the vulnerable.
Midnight on the New York subway. Many of the city's homeless are bedding down for the night aboard its empty carriages. By day, the subway has become a virtual ghost train. By night, it's become a mobile shelter. In the first 5 carriages we went in, we found people in search of refuge and sleep. Many are newly unemployed. Some of them labourers who rent rooms by the week, unable now to pay their landlords. The COVID dispossessed.
A lot of homeless people are afraid to go to the shelters because there are so many people there in such confined spaces. They're worried about catching the coronavirus. Instead, they're taking their chances on the subway.
The subway could hardly be described as safe. More than 100 members of staff on New York's mass transit system have been killed by the coronavirus.
Last stop on the right train, last stop, all passengers please, last stop.
This week New York did something it's never done before.
Last stop, all passengers exit this
conducted a planned overnight shutdown of a subway system that's always operated round the clock. The aim is to disinfect the carriages, and so the NYPD has been evicting the homeless.
You know they're closing the subway tonight. They're going to be asking you to get off the train.
Charity workers and city officials were on hand to offer help and shelter.
The last stop, you have to step off.
But this woman had no idea where in the city she was.
Are you staying somewhere tonight? Do you have a shelter?
The confusion and anxiety written across her face. The due to being amongst New York's most vulnerable. Over the weekend, 2 homeless people were found dead on the subway.
Homeless people right now in New York City have a 50% higher mortality rate from COVID-19 than do housed New Yorkers. So by not offering people just something as simple as a hotel room where they can go and be safe and safe isolate, we're really relegating them to die.
It can feel like we're living in another time of "Buddy, can you spare me a dime?" And just as the face mask has become the global symbol of this viral contagion, queues have become the marker of this economic catastrophe. Here the wait was for lunch at a shelter in Lower Manhattan.
Let's go, brother.
But it's not just the homeless anymore who are hungry. It's the newly jobless as well.
I have spoken with folks on this line who at the beginning of March were employed, and now they're unemployed. And they're trying to figure out how to make ends meet. And so part of how they're doing that is to stand on this line at the Bowery Mission, pick up a to-go meal, and make ends meet that way.
Back on the subway, the woman we saw turned down the offer of emergency shelter and took the last train back into Manhattan. Others headed out into the night. Poverty has been a propagator of this pandemic. Hardship has been a super spreader. And for many, the phrase that best describes New York's life abundant, the city that never sleeps, must now sound like a taunt. Nick Bryant, BBC News, New York.
France will begin lifting what has been one of the harshest lockdowns in Europe from Monday. Most businesses will reopen and people will be allowed to leave home without carrying a permit. But the country is being colour-coded, with some areas like Paris having to wait longer than others for restrictions to be lifted. Lucy Williamson is in Paris for us. So how's this going to work?
Well, France, as you say, is going to be divided into 2 colour-coded zones, red and green. Here in Paris and the regions of the north, south and east, it's going to be red. That's where the virus is circulating. It's where the hospitals have seen more than 80% of their intensive care beds filled with coronavirus patients. Now, on Monday, when the lockdown starts to lift, you won't see many big differences between the 2 zones. Primary schools and shops will open across the country, or at least they'll start to, and people will be able to move freely up to 60 miles from their homes. But it's over the next few weeks that divisions could start to appear. You've got middle schools opening in the green zones only, and possibly in a few weeks' time, even cafes, bars and restaurants. The Prime Minister said he didn't want to think about a 2-speed France, but it could be, depending on what happens in the next few weeks, that's where this plan is heading.
Lucy, thank you.